I am a Yank in Sussex. In an earlier produced video on this channel, a video about Bramber Castle, a ruined Norman castle in Sussex that was founded in 1071 by William de Braose, link in the description, I said the following. I just had to find out as much as possible about the castle, its builder, and its history. And with some digging, I found a wealth of information about it. So much so that I will have to break this video into two parts. The first part about the castle itself, and the second about the family who founded it 1,000 years ago. Well, this is that video. This is part 2 of Bramber Castle, and it is about the rise and fall of the House of Braose, the builders and maintainers of the castle for its first 250 years. So on with the tale. Keep in mind that this video will cover only the high points of the story, because to give it full justice, it would stretch things out way too long. This is partly the reason for the delay in getting this video out. Research for the video gave me so much material that using all of it would have produced a video nearly an hour in length or more. I then cut that version down and was still sitting at 40 minutes long. I could write a book about this little nook of British history, and in fact I plan to. The House of Braose was an important Norman-French noble house that flourished in Sussex during the first centuries after the Norman conquest of England in the 11th century CE. As every schoolboy and girl knows, in the year 1066, William the Duke of Normandy invaded what was then known as Angleland, meaning the land of the Angles, and defeated King Harold II's Anglo-Saxon forces at the Battle of Hastings. His victory caused him to be known ever afterwards as William the Conqueror. Because the conqueror had to spend the bulk of his time in Normandy, keeping that vital part of his realm safe from his continental rivals, he had to establish an efficient system of control in England. Part of this system involved confiscating the lands of the nobles who fought against him at Hastings and in subsequent rebellions, and giving them to the noblemen who fought for him. One of the lords allied with Duke William in his conquest of England was a man named William de Braose in his native tongue, which was Norman French. Guillaume, of course, is the French equivalent of William in modern English, and he was de Braose, meaning of Braose, because he was the Lord of Braose, a region and town in Normandy. So the name comes down to us in English as de Braose, making him known to us as William de Braose. In Latinized form, the name has been recorded as de Braosa. He may not have been at the Battle of Hastings. The records are unclear about this, but he was certainly a loyal follower of the conqueror. Because of Sussex's importance in keeping the conqueror's new dominion of England secure, he gave lordship over certain parts of Sussex, called Raps, to his most loyal and able supporters. De Braose, being among those important supporters, was given authority over the part of Sussex called Bramber. In my earlier set of videos explaining what is Sussex, I point out that the territory of the Rap of Bramber was originally part of the Raps of Arundel and Lewes, but about 5 years after the conquest, King William created the new Rap from those two. The district and castle were known as Bramber, because it was centered on what was then called the River Bramber. The river is known today as the River Adur, for reasons I won't go into now. The river's importance was due to it then being navigable for commerce purposes all the way up to the town of Stenning, which was an important port and market town, and the reason for siting the castle close to Stenning was for its defense. So it was that Guillaume de Braose became William, the first Lord of Bramber. Now, just a note on terminology to help us stay perhaps less confused as I go on telling about the de Braose family. The point of confusion I'm worried about is the many Williams problem. The name William was very popular in the de Braose family, and that name was also shared by the first 2 kings of England during this time. In the de Braose family, most of the lords of Bramber were named William. So when I say William de Braose, the problem is, which William? I could solve this by saying William the First, but then we run into the fact that William the Conqueror was also William the First. I'm going to solve this by using the cardinal form of the number for de Braoses instead of the ordinal, which I will reserve for the kings of England. Cardinal, by the way, means the number itself, for example, 1. The ordinal form of the number 1, on the other hand, is first, because it refers to the order in which it comes. So William the First or Second refers to a King William, but William I or William II refers to a Lord William. Are we clear? So let's begin with William I. It isn't known when the first Lord of Bramber, William I de Braose, was born, nor where exactly. He was probably born in Braose in Normandy, since he was the nobleman in charge there at the time of the conquest. His exact date and place of death is likewise unknown. Upon being appointed Lord of Bramber, William chose to build his head castle on a knoll overlooking both Steyning and the River Bramber, and the tidal flats leading up to it. This was in 1071, some 5 years after the conquest. It was a natural place of defense, and the castle was built according to the standard Norman French design called motte and bailey. De Braose was not only Lord of Bramber, but the Conqueror gave him other lands in Sussex, as well as land in Dorset, in the area around Wareham and Corfe, 2 manors in Surrey, as well as 2 in Berkshire at Southcote and Bray, and at Downton in Wiltshire. This has nothing to do with Downton Abbey, in case you were wondering. Along with the castle at Bramber, de Braose built a church dedicated to St. Nicholas for his family and the other residents of the castle. Besides being a church, the original structure also accommodated a small priory of Benedictine monks. Later, when it became apparent that the St. Nicholas Church was inadequate for the needs of the priory, William had a new priory built across the river in the village of Beeding. Of course, the new priory needed a church, and so one was built and dedicated to St. Peter. This church was thereafter used as Beeding Village's principal house of worship. The old priory, where the monks would have lived, is no longer standing, but a new building called the Priory was constructed on its site in the 19th century and was probably built using some of the old structure's materials. The modern St. Peter Church is considerably larger than the original was. De Braose also had a causeway and a bridge built that ran from the castle across the tidal flats and the path of the River Adur to the village of Beeding. The path of the causeway, now called the street, became part of the basis for Bramber village. This causeway also featured a small church dedicated to St. Mary. The church itself no longer exists as such, but its descendant, a chapel or a monastic hostel for pilgrims and monks called St. Mary's House, still exists, approximately in the same location. This house was built in 1470 and is open to the public seasonally as a tea room. Some 20 years after he became Lord of Bramber, on Sunday 11 December 1093, William I de Braose attended his last known public event, a dedicatory mass at the new priory to St. Florent that he had financed in his home barony in Braose. This was the last time William I de Braose appears in the public record. The next time an act of the Lord of Bramber was recorded, it was in 1096, and the name attached to the lordship was that of Phillip. We don't know exactly when or under what circumstances William I died. William I de Braose may have had many children, as they did in those days, but we know of only one, a boy named Phillip. At William's death, Phillip de Braose inherited his father's titles and lands. He was a very rich man. It is said that during his life he was the 10th wealthiest layman in England. In 1097, in support of King William II, Phillip led forces into Wales, and he was able to retake and hold lands around the towns of Builth and New Radnor. These 2 towns had originally been brought into the Norman English kingdom by William Fitzosbern, a relative of William the Conqueror, but upon Fitzosbern's death in 1071 was reclaimed by the Welsh princes. Phillip is believed to have rebuilt and strengthened the castles at Builth and New Radnor at this time. They would have been constructed of wood, though the one at Builth was later rebuilt in stone by King Edward I. Today, both castles are just earthworks, as all the stone has been robbed away for use elsewhere over the centuries. In 1103, Philip traveled to the newly conquered Kingdom of Jerusalem to fight in support of maintaining Christian control over parts of the Holy Land conquered during the First Crusade. How long he served there and in what campaigns he participated in is unknown. Apparently, Philip suffered from blindness towards the end of his life. The legend as to how he became blind is rather dramatic, since it was attributed to divine disfavor and not to any physical accident or illness. The story goes that sometime during the second decade of the 1100s, while Phillip was visiting Builth, he took his dogs out hunting. Upon the close of day, he found that he was near the church of St. Avan, in the town of Llanfair, and decided to spend the night in the church rather than return to his castle in the darkness. At first light the next day, Phillip woke to find that not only had all his dogs gone mad, he himself was blind. This was seen as punishment for having disrespected the sanctity of the church. From then on, Phillip lived in darkness, but after some time decided to redeem himself for his supposed offense against God. According to this story, in 1130 he handed over the governance of his lands to his son William II, and with the help of loyal companions traveled back to the Holy Land. His friends took him to the front line of battle on his war horse, where he charged the enemy, sightless but with sword in hand, and so met an honorable death. Phillip had 4 children with his wife Eanor de Totnes, the eldest, his heir, being named William, and another boy and 2 girls named Philip, Basilia, and Gillian. After inheriting the lordship over Bramber and other holdings, William II de Braose was already one of the richest men in England, and by the end of his life he had increased this wealth substantially. He owned or controlled a number of estates in Normandy, as well as in Sussex, Dorset, Devon, and Gloucestershire in England, and Brecon, Abergavenny, Builth, and New Radnor in Wales. It was William II who built what is known as Bramber Castle in Sussex. This is located west of the village of West Grinstead, and like Bramber Castle, Bramber Castle is near the course of the River Adur, in this case the west branch of the river. William II built it according to the usual Motte and Bailey plan, and it would have been largely constructed from wood. William is believed to have built this castle primarily as a hunting seat, but with the secondary purpose as a defensive backup to Bramber Castle in case of coastal danger. The castle was later rebuilt by King John in stone and masonry, and its remnant survives today on the estate of the Burrell family, hereditary knights or baronets, who in the early 19th century built a modern, castellated Gothic revival mansion nearby. William II died in 1179, and his domains passed to his son William, the 4th Lord of Bramber. In 1179, upon his father's death, William III became the 4th Lord of Bramber. But about 3 years before he inherited the de Braose lordship from his father, this William de Braose went down in infamy, especially among the Welsh, for a most despicable act he committed in Wales in 1175. The event is called the Massacre, and led to the Welsh naming him the Ogre of Abergavenny. There are conflicting reports of this event, including its motivation. But essentially, after inviting a number of Welsh lords and princes to a Christmas dinner at Abergavenny Castle, a peace gesture, he treacherously had them all murdered. It seems that this may have been connected with retaliation on one of the lords, Cecil ap Dyfnwal of the Castle Arnault, whom William believed responsible for his uncle Henry Fitzmiles's murder. This despicable act caused William III to lose royal favor for a time, and cemented the Welsh people's disdain for the de Braose family. But after the ascension of King Henry II's son Richard I, Lionheart, to the throne in 1189, William III's loyal support of Richard caused him to be restored to the good graces of the royal family. And when Richard I was killed in battle in 1199, William's immediate support of Prince John's bid for the throne earned him great rewards from John. William III's tenure as Lord of Bramber marked the height of the power of the House of Braose. This rise in power was remarkable, and garnered William III a good deal of jealousy from the other barons. But it all came to an end as a result of the perfidy of King John. John was a suspicious, petty, spiteful, and cruel ruler. For one reason or another, he demanded that William pay him an enormous sum of money, and when this was refused, he confiscated all of William's estates and titles, and capped this by taking William's wife Matilda and their son William captive. These two were subsequently murdered, reputedly by starvation after being walled up inside the dungeon in one of King John's castles. William fled England and died in France soon afterwards in 1211. Why did King John do this with one of his most loyal supporters? Nobody knows for sure, but it seems it had something to do with the mysterious fate of Arthur, John's nephew and a claimant to the English crown. William III and his wife Matilda, also known as Maud, are reputed to have had 16 children. The most important were Giles, who entered the priesthood and later became the Bishop of Hereford, and Reginald. In April or May of 1208, at about the start of the trouble between his father William III and King John, Giles seems to have been briefly put into custody as a hostage for his father's good behavior. But by June 1208, he had escaped to France, where he joined other English exiles in conspiring against King John. John allowed Giles to return to England in 1213, however, and even restored some of the de Braose lands to him. But by mid-November 1215, Giles had died and was buried in Hereford Cathedral. Giles was never formally a Lord of Bramber, despite holding some traditional de Braose lands. But for courtesy, I am calling Giles the 5th Lord of Bramber, especially due to his efforts to have the title restored to his nephew John, the son of William III's eldest son William, who was starved to death by King John. As a churchman with vows of celibacy, Giles never married and had no children, and thus the de Braose estates in his charge fell to his younger brother Reginald at his death. After Giles de Braose's death in November 1215, King John acquiesced to Reginald's claims to the de Braose estates in Wales. This was in May 1216. Reginald thus became lord of all the previous de Braose estates and lands in the Welsh marches. Then, finally, after King John's death in 1216, his successor, King Henry III, restored Reginald to royal favour and the rest of the de Braose properties, including the Bramber estates, in 1217. Thus Reginald became the 6th Lord of Bramber. This came with a complication, however. Since at that time Wales was only partially under the suzerainty of the King of England, there were still lords and princes in Wales who held power. The complication with being restored to royal favour was that because Reginald owed allegiance to Prince Llewellyn the Great due to his marriage to his daughter Gladys, and had been given the lordships of Gower, Builth, and Brecon as part of his dowry. The complication caused actual combat between Reginald and the Welsh followers of Llewellyn, and he ended up surrendering some of his lands. Eventually, Reginald sold the title, Lord of Bramber, to his nephew John. At this point, I should point out that once we resume counting Williams in this family, the next Lord of Bramber, who is a William, will be counted as William VI, not as you might expect William IV. This is because William IV was starved to death with his mother, Maud, by King John, and never inherited the lordship. William V was the son of Reginald, and though he inherited the various de Braose lordships in Wales from his father, he was never Lord of Bramber, because his father sold that honour to his cousin, John de Braose. Is this sufficiently complicated for you? John was the eldest grandson of William III de Braose. According to the principle of male primogeniture, under normal circumstances he would have been the lawful heir to the de Braose lordship, being the eldest son of the eldest son, but his grandfather William III's disposition of his lands and titles by King John effectively took him out of the line of succession for a time, until his uncle Reginald sold him the honour of Bramber in 1226. He had already been gifted the lordship of Gower, also formerly a de Braose property, by his father-in-law, Llewellyn the Great, upon John's marriage to Llewellyn's daughter Margaret, and he finally inherited the rest of it, including the lordship of Abergavenny, in 1228 when his uncle Reginald died. Unfortunately for John, He didn't possess these lands for very long, because 4 years later he died by accident when he fell from his horse while riding around his land in Bramber in 1232. He was only 34 when he died, and his lands and titles passed to his son, William VI. William VI was the first de Braose heir to enjoy a long life without significant upheaval in 3 generations. He inherited the honour of Bramber and most of the traditional de Braose properties upon the death of his father John in 1232. Being just 12 years old at the time of his accession, he would have remained a ward of his mother until around 1245 when he became of age. He served as a loyal adviser and supporter to both Kings Henry III and Edward I Longshanks, and when he died in 1291 at age 67, his 59-year tenure as Lord of Bramber was the longest of any of the de Braose line. In 1290, William was summoned to sit in Parliament, and this writ of summons entitled him to the title Baron, making him the first Baron Braose. William VII inherited the de Braose lordship and barony upon the death of his father William in 1291. William VII continued to be just as strong a supporter of King Henry III and his son Edward I as his father had been, and contributed both money and personal military service in Edward's wars in Wales, Scotland, France, and Flanders. From 1298 to 1306, he was involved in the Scottish Wars and fought at the Battle of Falkirk on 22 July 1298, when William Wallace, Braveheart, was defeated. William died in 1326, aged 66 years. William had 2 daughters, Aline and Joan, and 1 son, William. The son was mentioned in connection with military service in 1311, but when the estate was settled after William VII's death, there was no mention of him. It seems likely that he had died in the meantime. With William VII having no living male issue, the lordship of Bramber and the barony of Braose became extinct. His 2 daughters, Aline and Joan, each inherited a share of their father's estates, which were then added to their respective husbands' lands. After some research, I find that at the time William VII died in 1326, he had a second cousin, Baron Sir John de Braose of Stinton, who was a direct male-line descendant of William's great-grandfather John. According to male primogeniture, the prevailing law of inheritance at the time, this second cousin could have inherited the Braose barony, but inasmuch as their ancestry had diverged about 100 years previously, almost certainly neither one knew that the other existed. Even so, that remaining branch of the de Braose family died out in the male line in 1424, so the Braose barony would have become extinct eventually anyway. There might have been a couple of other possible de Braose branches that could have carried on the barony, and interestingly, there was a second creation of the de Braose baronage in 1302, when a Thomas de Braose was raised to the peerage by King Edward I Longshanks. It seems certain that this Thomas de Braose was a descendant of the original de Braose line, but I have been unable to trace how they were related. In any event, they never had anything to do with Bramber Castle or with any traditional de Braose holdings, and that baronage went extinct too in 1399. The castle at Bramber, as was mentioned in my video Bramber Castle Part 1, came eventually by marriage into the ownership of the powerful Howard family, who became the Dukes of Norfolk. The castle, in pretty much the dilapidated condition we find it in today, was sold by them to an entrepreneur in the early 20th century, before coming into the ownership of the National Trust. The present Duke of Norfolk, whose seat is Arundel Castle in Sussex, is Edward William Fitzalan Howard, the 18th Duke of Norfolk. He is a descendant of the de Braose family through Aline de Braose, daughter of the 9th and final Lord of Bramber. This has been a production of A Yank in Sussex. If you've enjoyed the video, please click the like button. If you haven't already done so, feel free to click the subscribe button along with the notification bell in order to be notified when new videos are posted on the channel. May you have a very nice day.